Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Oller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back, Buckeye fans, to another edition of the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz and Rob Oller. It's Wednesday, March 12th, and in a matter of a few days, Ohio State will be opening spring football practice on Monday. It's a condensed format. It's starting 2 weeks later than in most years. Typically, Ohio State would be starting the week before spring break. This year, they're starting the week after, and they're going to hold their 15 practices over 4 weeks. The length of the last football season has sort of impacted that. But here we are. Spring practice is here, and we're going to talk about some of the key storylines coming into things.
Obviously, you've got – I don't say it's not a brand new team, but they're probably, I mean, I didn't do the count, but what is it? They lost 8 starters on defense. They lost a bunch of guys.
13 of 22 starters.
Okay. But here's the funny thing. I think that if we were to say, to list a depth chart, who's going to start, I bet you we could come up with about 18 that are fairly certain. I mean, and then there are probably 2 or 3 more that were reasonably certain, but certainly is open, like quarterback. I mean, I think it'll be Julian Sayin, but I'm not ready to go and guarantee it. Lincoln Keenholz is going to fight for it. You know, Tavian St. Clair's a 5-star guy. I'd be very surprised if he were the starter, but you know, Ryan Day is certainly not going to anoint anybody anytime soon. But that's a position. But then you know, offensive line. I think Carson Inman's going to be the center. Other than that, I'm not absolutely sure of anything. You know, I think Tegra Shabola is going to start. I think that, I mean, they got a bunch of guys. That was the benefit of what happened at the end of last year. All those guys had to play. Now it's a matter of finding where they are. I think a guy named Jeremiah Smith might be able to get some playing time this year, I'm guessing.
But maybe not in spring practice. It's going to be a little lighter for some of the veteran players. Ryan Day has made no secret about that over the coming weeks because of the length of last season. Don't be surprised if a lot of guys with their turning experience, the Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Smith, Parnell Tate, if those guys have a lighter workload in spring practice because they just got through playing a 16-game season.
I bet you Jeremiah.
Here's my guarantee. Buckeyes win it all. So I bumped into a podcast listener this week who said, "Oh yeah, you're the contrarian guy on the podcast." I said, "Well, somebody has to be," but I also said that, okay, we'll turn a new leaf here. Buckeyes win it all, no questions.
So Robo, you're the natty or bust guy. You're natty or bust.
Rah bleed scarlet and gray.
How about rah Robo?
Rah what?
Rah Robo. That could be your
that's my new moniker, Rah Robo. You know, the glass is always not even half full. It's overflowing.
The suds are all over the place.
There be any debate, they've got the greatest coaching staff. This team is better than the New England Patriots at their best.
Well, they have their coordinator.
Now carry
on.
Time to carry on.
Yeah. You're done for the year, pretty much. This was your opening salvo.
This was it. I mean, there's nothing else. There's nothing else. I'll see you back.
It's all downhill from here.
Where's the national title game? That's
where is it, Joey? I don't know this stuff.
I believe it's Miami.
It's Miami. Yeah, I'll see you in Miami when I'll see you when the confetti's falling in Miami. Although it's an outdoor stadium, I guess they have to use the cannons. It can't come out of the ceiling.
Maybe they can import the cannons from the Blue Jackets.
There you go. Blue Jackets going to win it all too. Why not?
What did you take today?
Positivity pills.
Okay, Dale Carnegie. How many people?
You negative Nellies.
All right, Joe. To my point earlier, Joey, since Rose drank the Kool-Aid, do you agree that we could name most of the starters on this team?
I buy that, and I think a lot of that is because so many of the guys who are in line to start now were pretty big rotational players last year, especially on the defensive side of the ball, because you had players like Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson who rotated behind JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. Then you had Arvell Reese, who was effectively a third linebacker, and now with Cody Simon moving on, he's in position to move up and have a larger role. Jermaine Matthews, he replaced Denzel Burke second half of the semifinal against Texas. He should be able to seize the starting spot. So there are a lot of positions on both sides of the ball where you could pencil somebody in because of their experience from a year ago. I think Brandon Ennis is well positioned to replace Emeka Ibuka in the slot. There are some intriguing, I think, position battles, but so much of that I think is going to be decided later on down the road in fall camp. I don't really see much of anything being settled in spring practice, and certainly not at quarterback. They've historically never really tied things up and settled things in spring. Those have tended to go on in August, and that should be the case this year because it's a pretty wide open competition. They're going to rotate the three of those guys pretty evenly in terms of the way they divide reps, and they are going to be incentivized to keep everybody in the boat before the spring window opens for transfers after spring practice.
Here's my 3 question marks: quarterback, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. Those to me are the intriguing things going in. I think the position battles are, they're what they are. They're the same every year, pretty much. You'll have some guys. I mean, defensive end, maybe, in linebacker, we'll see there. But I'm just most intrigued by, is saying the real deal because their options aren't real great there. Bill kind of addressed it, but I mean, this is not like Will Howard coming in with experience and playing against a guy or competing against a guy in Brown who hadn't really played much but had been around the system. And I guess you could say Keenholz is kind of that. He's been in the system, but he's had one real experience, and it was not good, that Missouri game in the Cotton Bowl. But after quarterback, you've got a defensive coordinator who he's had a lot of success under Bill Belichick in New England, who was pretty much of a flop as head coach in Detroit. He comes with a nice resume and good recommendations, but we just don't know. I'm not saying it's not gonna work out, but he does have big shoes to fill. Jim Knowles was good at what he did, and they were very successful. And on the other side, Brian Hartline checks all the boxes except one. He's never called plays, and we just don't know. So to me, those are going to be interesting to watch. I think it's safe to say that I'd be surprised if Brian Hartline can match what Chip Kelly did. That's just sort of a no-brainer, right? I'm not saying he's going to be a disaster or even close to that, but Chip Kelly, had experience and was known as sort of this offensive guru. Brian Hartline is an unknown.
Last year's staff, I think, was a dream staff for Ryan Day. He had his mentor, who he felt completely comfortable with handing off play calling duty to. He had Jim Knowles, who clearly knew what he was doing. This year, I think those are legitimate questions. I mean, Matt Patricia's coming from the pro game. The Detroit experience was a disaster as a head coach, but he's not a head coach now. He's not that. And I will say, we met him for the first time last week. Very personable. And we kind of heard these stories that, he's not great to deal with. And now, was this a PR offensive? Probably, but
he seemed a little overly saccharine.
He was very eager. He's very
eager.
I was kind of expecting this almost dour, grumpy, and he wasn't that at all. I mean, he was.
Yeah, he definitely went against type. I think.
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to judge him by that, one way or the other. But it was a different Matt Patricia than I was anticipating. And as far as Brian Hartline, he had the title 2 years ago. He didn't have the job, essentially. And now he's got the job. And he learned from Chip Kelly. I was interested in how he explained it. It was basically what he said is, I'm a sponge. I don't know everything. I listen to everything, everybody. I learn what I can every chance I get. And you can't question what he's done as a wide receivers coach. It's been phenomenal. To recruit and develop the guys that he has it's almost unprecedented in college football. But this is a big step. And I think that, like in the Texas game, that's his first game. How much will Ryan Day kind of say, okay, Junior, I got this, in key situations. I don't know. That's going to be very interesting. I think against Grambling and teams like that, it's all yours, Brian. But he's going to have to show that he understands that stuff and can do it. Now, I also think it's always a little bit overstated that it's like the coordinator who calls the plays. It usually is a collaborative thing. It's not something that's just decided by him on a whim in the press box. They've plotted it all week, a group collaboration, and so it's just executing the plan. But still, there are times when you got to make that play call, and is he up to it?
To me, that's why the hire of Matt Patricia, I think, is the more interesting and more significant of the two and has larger potential ramifications, because for the offensive side of the ball, Ryan Day is still there. During the playoff, he was heavily involved in the game planning, and Chip Kelly was the primary play caller, but Day took on greater responsibility. And I think that is going to shield Brian Hartline to some degree. The backstop is always Ryan Day in a big moment. And again, you have his experience as an offensive play caller there. Defense, you're losing a lot with Jim Knowles, and Matt Patricia was a defensive coordinator for a lot of years under Bill Belichick, who was that was his specialty, the defensive side of the ball. So that to me, I think, is going to where things could hinge on in the next year or two, is just how much can Matt Patricia make an impact with this defense. And that is also the side of the ball where they're experiencing much more attrition than on offense. You lose the quarterback, but you have a lot of other pieces on offense, back, receiver, offensive line. Defensive side of the ball is pretty devastated. You have Caleb Downs and really very few other pieces and parts from last year.
You have Sonny Styles, and you have Davis Igbenogson. So that's three good ones to have, assuming that Davis.
I said very few. That's three.
Okay. But Sonny Styles is not just a guy, right? Sonny Styles should be he played really well at the end of last year. He had, expected growing pains.
They lose 8 guys on defense. That's a lot
but also
let me step in. Let me step into this argument and shut you guys down, because I don't want fisticuffs. I have a question for you, real quick. I'm going to have to cut out here, but so you've got this quarterback situation, and now you have a new quarterbacks coach, correct?
Right. Yes.
I mean, maybe we're overlooking the importance. I mean, here's the deal. Ryan Day is always going to be a little bit of the quarterback whisperer, but he has stepped back from play calling and presumably from being in that QB room a little bit to kind of run the whole show. So, this new guy, Billy, right?
He's not a new guy.
Well, he's
been there.
He's new in this position totally. He's calling, it's his show, supposedly.
A little bit like last year.
He didn't have Chip Kelly. He's got Brian Hartline. Right.
A little bit like last year or 2 years ago, I guess, when Jim Knowles was the linebackers coach, but James Laurinaitis kind of ran the unit. And then last year, officially, James Laurinaitis was the linebackers coach. He was promoted from graduate assistant to linebackers coach last year. And it's a little, Billy Fessler, if you talk to Will Howard, like at the combine, and he gave a lot of credit to Billy Fessler for being the guy who was working one-on-one, because Chip Kelly, in addition to being quarterback's coach, was obviously the offensive coordinator. So the guy that on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis was with Will Howard and the quarterbacks was Billy Fessler. So it's a little bit like the Laurinaitis thing, where he did the job mostly one year and then got the job officially the next. So now he's a young guy. They think very highly of him, but he's got to do it. Great. I mean, it's like all these you think that they're ready, but you don't know till they do it.
I think that's fair.
You done?
I think that'll be a seamless transition with Billy Fessler coming in and replacing Chip Kelly as the quarterback's coach because of his role last year. The probably is, I think, with the offensive continuity they have, they're not going to change as much offensively as with this staff. Defense will be interesting to watch in that regard with the new coordinator and Patricia, and everyone has expressed a potential interest in maybe being a little more multiple in the fronts that they have used. Ohio State has historically been a team that leans on 4 down defensive linemen, and because of the personnel losing their entire starting defensive line, because of Matt Patricia's experience in running multiple fronts, 3 down linemen, 4 down linemen, they could be a little more versatile, multiple up front. I think that could be a storyline worth watching, just kind of what sort of schematic tweaks do they they make on defense.
Here's kind of the irony of it. Jim Knowles came in from Oklahoma State, and he was known for the quote-unquote jack position, the hybrid defensive end linebacker. He tried Jack Sawyer at that position 2 years ago, did not work. Pretty much abandoned it, and now Knowles is gone to Penn State, and you've got a guy, C.J. Hicks, I'm thinking specifically of, that they've moved to defensive end, but look, he's going to be on the lighter side of the defensive end. He's going to essentially kind of be a jack kind of position. Look, C.J. Hicks was actually the highest rated player in that recruiting class and has never really made a significant impact. He's had moments, but look, I mean, it's time. If he's ever going to make an impact, it's time. And we're going to talk about this. Joe and I have talked about doing we will do a story on this. That 2021 recruiting class has really been not very productive with a few exceptions. Well, 21 or 22?
No,
22.
The class at
22, right, 22. That recruiting class has not been very productive. Sonny Styles, who was a very, very late addition to that staff, is by far the most, has contributed the most. Now, there are guys like Caden Curry, who I expect to have good years. He's been productive everywhere he's been, especially on special teams. But the time is now for those guys. And for C.J. Hicks, who has a reputation for being a really good blitzer, well, now you're going to get your chance to do that.
That 22 class is in such stark contrast to 21, because that 21 class in large part carried them to a national title. Eko Buka, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau. Those guys were the cornerstone of a title team. And you look through the 22 class, you have to squint to find guys who are still at Ohio State who haven't transferred, and guys who are even starting. And
all four of the wide receivers in that room are gone, right?
Right. And C.J. Hicks is the best player in this class, and has played more time on special teams than on defense in his career by snap counts. I think what also is you start to notice about players in recruiting classes is, I think for a period of time we got used to players having extra time in their careers because of the COVID bonus year, and it feels like C.J. Hicks just got to campus, but he's now a senior in his last year. So many guys are back on the traditional, more condensed career timelines. So it's the chance to make an impact is a little smaller. It just things have sort of changed or returned to how they were pre-pandemic.
Yeah, we talked about the defensive line, and I think Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson are going to be the starting defensive ends. In the middle, I think you're looking at Caden McDonald, who played very well when he was called on, and he's a big, stout guy.
He was huge in that Penn State game where they had
that goal line stand.
Fourth quarter. He was a part of that and really plugged some spots there.
Yeah, you talk to players. That's a name that always pops up. Caden McDonald. And then Edric Houston is going to be the three technique guy. He was recruited as a defensive end. Everyone remembers the Sunny Day drama when it looked like he might flip to Alabama. Well, he's now a three technique, and that Tyleik Williams role basically, and he's got all the talent in the world. But as Larry Johnson said, there's a big difference between playing 15 plays a game and playing 40 plays a game. And the biggest question I have about the line is not who the starters are going to be; it's who the rotational guys, who are the other guys they're going to step up. We hear these names, but
they brought in a transfer that group too, Logan George from Idaho State.
Idaho State, yeah. Who, look, Larry Johnson, we wouldn't have brought him in if we didn't think he could play. It's a big jump, obviously, from that level to Ohio State, but he's an intriguing guy, right? I mean, the production is really, pretty impressive.
Well, you saw all the guys that Indiana brought a year ago with Kurt Signetti in his first year in the Big Ten, where they brought so many transfers from James Madison. Granted, that was an FBS school, but that was in a period of transition from the FCS to the FBS. So you're talking still about a lower level of the sport and bringing in a high number of guys who could be impact players. So there's something to be said, even though you're probably not playing at the highest level in the FCS, that you played a lot of football. And he was at a conference in that subdivision Idaho State is part of the Big Sky. So you're playing Montana State. You are playing better teams at that level of football. So that's worth some context and some background there. But yeah, defensive end's a spot where they need to try to make sure they have some depth, because you're replacing 4 starters, and you also need to be able to rotate. And some of these guys, like C.J. Hicks and Logan George, those players, you need to sort of find some roles for them. Even some of the guys from last year's recruiting class too are freshmen, but they are thin there, and that's part of the why I think there maybe is a willingness to even try some of the 3-down defensive line stuff, because even though they haven't run it as much free in the past, they have more experience at linebacker than on the defensive line right now, which is sort of flipped how it was a couple years ago, where they were very thin on linebacker. Well, they're a little deeper there than they have been in the past, and that could allow them to do some different stuff.
Yeah, their battles. One intriguing battle is who's going to replace Lathan Ransom, that safety spot. Jalen McClain, Malik Hartford are the 2 guys that are the front runners. So there are some of those battles, but even then, these are not guys that at least the people who follow the team fairly closely have never heard of. And that's the thing that's interesting about this team, is that most of these guys have not started, but they're familiar names, at least to people who, are more than casual fans. But it's a big difference, as I just said before, between being a part-time guy and being a full-time guy. And
think about some of these guys have started games before. Jalen McClain made a start last year, and Malik Hartford
right. But it's a grind of a season. You're talking about 15, 16 games, whatever it might be. Certainly 13 for sure. And that's a challenge. But I do think that this is the year, because they won it all last year. You're going to have the rabid fans who are never going to tolerate any loss. But I think for the most part, you don't get a get out of jail free card. But if they lose to Texas in the first game, I think most fans will probably say, okay, Texas is really good, and it's a long season, and don't overreact. You have a first-time starting quarterback, all that kind of stuff. They would win that game, boy.
Well, even if you have a team where you have the expectations of winning the title, no one game is carrying the same weight as it did in the past. So this will be an inexperienced group of starters and a younger crop of players coming through the system, but they'll have a chance to sort of find their sea legs because of the way the format of the sport works now.
Here's what's funny. I just went on the BetMGM site and looked up National Championship College Football Futures. Who's the favorite? What do you think?
Ohio State. Plus
500, which means 5-1. Texas is next. So that game could be 1 versus 2. And Georgia's right behind, then Oregon, Penn State. Surprised Penn State's not higher, honestly.
Well, they bring everybody back. They still don't have any receivers to bring back, so that is.
I know. I mean,
an issue for Penn State still.
It is an issue for Penn State, but they loaded up like Ohio State did, and they got a new coordinator too, a new defensive coordinator. Yeah, interesting. But I just thought, so even though Ohio State is reloading, they are still at the top of the heap. I mean,
they will probably be preseason top 5.
There's no question. There's no question. I think they'll be 1, 2, or 3. I don't know who's going to be. I mean, if I had to guess, I would probably say Texas is number 1. Just the anticipation of Arch Manning taking over and all that. But and they do have a lot of people back, but they lost a lot of players too. They had how many players did they have at the combine? Like 14 or 15, something like that. Ohio State had 15. I think they had 14. So, that's going to be a fun game. You wouldn't want to miss that one, would you, Joey?
No, you would not. Not
want to miss that one. But so it's going to be a weird year in a good way, I think, for Ohio State, that you're going to have the ability to repeat. I mean, because what those odds tell me is not so much that Ohio State's going to be great. It's that nobody else is clearly the favorite. That's what that tells me, is that Georgia lost people, Texas lost people. That's what's surprising to me, because actually to have a favorite that's only plus 500, that's pretty long odds on a preseason favorite. So it's wide open. We're
living in a post Nick Saban world in college football, where there's not that one team you just slot to be number 1 every year, because they just are like the Empire in Star Wars, where they just
you assume it, right? You just assume that Alabama's number 1.
Just plug them number 1. They reload to such a degree. There's always a great running back. They're an imposing defense. Georgia looked like maybe they were going to become that team, but they've had such an issue with quarterback recruitment over the years that seemed to have sort of prevented them from taking that leap maybe and becoming more of a sort of what you would call a quote unquote dynasty in the sport. And because there's no Saban Alabama pre-NIL team, I think it's a lot more, I don't want to call it parity at the top of the sport, but they're the top 5, top 10, I think is a little more flawed maybe than it would be in the past.
Alabama's, if you're wondering, plus 1,500, and those 15-1. They're like pretty far down the list, behind Notre Dame, behind Penn State, Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State. So, yeah, it's a new day. Look, Ohio State is pretty well positioned.
Is it a pun?
What?
Is it a pun?
What?
Making a pun there? It's a new day?
No, I was not. But Ohio State's as well positioned as any team to be that default number one. I think the only thing kind of holding Ohio State back from that is that Ohio as a talent base isn't what it was a generation ago. So you can't just lock down the state like Jim Tressel would do and say, okay, there's our foundation. I mean, you look at last year's team, even from that great 21 recruiting class, the only Ohio native who was a star on that team was Jack Sawyer. That was it. So when you have to recruit everywhere else in your home state isn't what it used to be. Now, it's still good, and you're still going to get good players from Ohio, but it's not what it used to be in terms of producing talent.
That will be the challenge, and it's hard to keep coordinators. I mean, that was the thing that helped Nick Saban's time at Alabama. They were able to always, it seems like, replace coordinators and deal with staff turnover.
It was like coach rehab school, right? These coaches would go there and need to rehabilitate their reputations or bolster their resumes.
And especially on the other side of the ball, which made Bama so good, is it seemed like Saban was always able to find a great offensive coordinator to match his skills as a defensive guy. And I think it's to me, when I think about the defensive coordinator hire being so crucial for Ryan Day, you just think about his backgrounds on the offensive side of the ball. And so you need a coach on the other side that can complement you. It's why Georgia, I think, has tailed off a little bit in recent years since since Kirby lost Todd Monken, who was a great offensive coordinator for them when they went back to back. He left for the NFL he's now with the Baltimore Ravens, and they haven't really been able to maybe been quite as good on that side of the ball, and it's hurt him. And so I think that's the pairing of Ryan Day and Jim Knowles worked well. He was there for 3 years. They really incrementally got better, and last year they were great in the playoff. Big reason why they won. So a lot hinges on the Matt Patricia hire to pan out for him.
Yeah, there's no question. But Matt Patricia is also walking into a situation where everyone else on that defensive staff is a holdover.
Yeah,
so,
I thought it was interesting to hear Day talk about that last week in a little more detail. He had kind of, when I sat down with him for a feature a couple of weeks ago, I'd mentioned they wanted to get a defensive coordinator who was going to be on board with keeping the rest of the assistants on staff in place. They liked Larry Johnson, defensive line coach, James Laurinaitis as the linebackers coach, Matt Curry and Tim Walton as the secondary coaches. All those guys were in line to come back. They liked what they were doing. They didn't want to bring in a defensive coordinator who wanted to then bring in 3 of his own guys and have to replace all of them. So Patricia was on board with that. And Day also mentioned that if you're going to have coaching turnover and it's going to be inevitable, I think you want to be able to just kind of plug in and replace guys without having to sort of revamp an entire side of the ball of primary assistant coaches and position coaches and support staff to try to have some continuity, even if you're replacing your top line coordinator was important for them.
Yeah, I agree. And Matt Patricia said that he's flexible. He's flexible in scheme. He's flexible in who he works with. He does have familiarity with Tim Walton in particular. He's worked with him before. So, and the other thing is Matt Patricia didn't have a lot of leverage. He was out of football last year, essentially. And so it's not like he could come in and say, hey, I'm the defensive coordinator of the defending Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. Give me carte blanche. I mean, he wasn't in that position.
And
he flamed out as
it's been so many years with Belichick. Yeah. And Belichick's now in North Carolina, hired some of the guys from that tree. When you spend so many years in one place, your coaching Rolodex is a little different than if you were bouncing around all over the place.
Yeah. Let's get back to just kind of spring practice stuff. And before we wrap this up. I'm trying to think of different positions we haven't hit on. Running back, obviously Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins are gone. James Peoples played a decent amount as a freshman last year. They really like him. C.J. Donaldson, the transfer from West Virginia, is kind of a bigger power back.
230 pounds.
Yeah, and you hear a lot about Bo Jackson, a freshman from the Cleveland area, Northeast Ohio. People who know think he's going to be really good. So again, it'll be probably a committee approach. I think teams now realize that's the way to go. That even running backs don't want to be the guy that carries 30 times a game. It's just not good for their long-term viability as a player, especially when it comes to the NFL. So I think the rotation system, and I think that Peoples and Donaldson do complement each other.
I had the feeling that they might rotate 3 this year, maybe more 2, and that's just a gut feeling about it. But nobody is so established where you are going to just rely on a 1-2 punch. It's a longer season. You have guys who are a little more inexperienced. I think you can afford to do that and kind of just see what works. I think you have 3 guys who are pretty obvious candidates to do that. With the 3 you mentioned, Bill, then you even have another freshman who could be interesting, Anthony Turbo Rogers, who great nickname.
Turbo and Bo Jackson's a great name, period, right? Bo Jackson, I mean, geez.
Right. It's got a good history of
And should we try to tackle the offensive line? Because, there are a lot of candidates. I would think that the 2 transfers will be the tackles, especially Ethan Onyanwa, came from Rice. I think that he's probably going to be, if I had to guess, the left tackle. I think Carson Insman will be the center. If I had to guess, I'd say Tegra Shabola will be the right guard. Philip Daniels, the transfer from Minnesota, will get a shot at right tackle. They don't have a lot of tackles. I mean, that's one place where they're still thin.
That is where they're thin on depth. I would probably plug or pencil Philip Daniels in as the right tackle right now. I did a depth chart projection last week and had him as a right tackle there based on his experience at Minnesota. He started 4 games in November last year as a redshirt freshman. Certainly does not have the experience as Onawa on the left side, who started over 20 games I think maybe over 30 at Rice. He was a 3-year starter at Rice, so a lot of experience there. But outside of those 2 tackles, the next guy is Ian Moore, who's a redshirt freshman from New Palestine, Indiana, and then you have Carter Lowe, who's a true freshman from Toledo. But you don't have experienced backups at tackle. George Fitzpatrick and Zen Mahalski both transferred. I think it's really hard to keep offensive linemen around for a lot of years because it's such an in-demand position that they can go into the portal and probably find a chance to start or maybe be closer to starting somewhere else and be in line to get some more NIL money or whatnot.
And then you also have Luke Montgomery and Austin Sireveld, who obviously played a lot last year. So they have depth.
They'll probably compete for that left guard spot.
Yeah.
Probably could. I mean, we talk about there is not a ton of depth at tackle, but like Luke Montgomery is somebody who could probably swing out the tackle.
Well, Tegra Shabola definitely could.
Tegra could too.
Has the body for it.
Luke Montgomery's first year at Ohio State, when he was a true freshman, he was competing for that right tackle spot that ultimately went to Josh Fire. Or last year, he was competing in one of the tackle spots.
If last year proved anything, it's that those guys in a pinch can play anywhere, right? I mean, we wouldn't have thought that Donovan Jackson could be the starting left tackle on the national championship team, right? I mean, if you would have said to us at the beginning of the year, last year, okay, the line we know is kind of shaky a little bit to begin with. You're going to lose Josh Simmons, who's been playing great, who's probably going to be the first player taken in the draft from Ohio State. You're going to lose him in the first Oregon game. He's done for the year. Oh, and then you're going to lose Seth McLaughlin, who had solidified the center job. You'll lose him, not have him for the playoff. You're going to have to move Donovan Jackson to left tackle. Hasn't played it since high school. What are your chances of winning a national championship? Slim. And so they proved that they could do it. You can slot guys in, and they can find a way. And so I think that gives that line, honestly, I think that gives that line a lot of confidence going into this year. That's confidence they didn't have last year. A bunch of those guys were like, well, we hope we hope they did it this year. I mean, they did it with 9 different starters in 2024. And so I think the line will now be a strength of the team, or at least it should be.
I would think so. And you certainly have guys who have played a lot of ball, certainly on the interior of the line. It's interesting thinking about the line. It's got a very Ohio makeup to it in a lot of ways. Carson Hinton's from Wisconsin, but Luke Montgomery and Austin Cerevel are Ohio guys. Tegra Chabola's from Cincinnati. Phillip Daniels, the transfer from Minnesota, is also from Cincinnati. So that is a position group they've really leaned on some local guys to really kind of carry the way, and it did work out for them last year. They really played hard the way they were blocking late in the playoff run.
And another position we haven't really talked about is tight end. You lose G. Scott, but you have a bunch of guys back, and you have Max Clare, who was a star at Purdue. He got overlooked in the Big Ten last year because you had Colston Loveland in Michigan and oh my God, what's his name? Tyler Warren at Penn State, who were obviously stars. And so Max Clare was third team All Big Ten. That's pretty good. This league also had Luke Lachey. Jim Lachey's son at Iowa is good. He's going to get drafted. And so you had a lot of talent at that position. And Max Clare on a very, very bad Purdue team was by far their leading pass catcher. And that's going to help Ohio State a lot, I think. I think that having him along with the other guys, maybe this is the year Jelani Thurman breaks through. You have Will Kazmarek back again, the transfer from Ohio University.
Bennett Christian, too.
Bennett Christian back. Right. Well, that's going to be a deep room. They'll have a lot of options between what sort of personnel formations they want to be in with. They're very deep at receiver and tight end, so they're going to have a lot of scheme flexibility on offense. Well, have we covered it, Joey?
I think we touched on all the position groups, kind of the sort of some of the things to watch as we dive into spring practice, and certainly we'll have more updates on whatever we learn in the weeks ahead. So it'll be a condensed 4 weeks leading into the spring showcase on April 12th. We should mention that they are calling it a spring showcase this year. I wouldn't rule out them possibly having a scrimmage or some type of a game format, but it'll probably be a little more condensed than in past years, and it's going to probably not feature as many high-profile returners, but they do like having a game format, especially for younger players who are going to be in the horseshoe for the first time. So I would expect they'll have some type of game, and certainly I think for all the quarterbacks, they'll be throwing passes, I would think, in that game. That's where I think they'll probably end up, but the format remains to be determined.
Okay, well, I think that about covers it. We will, of course, be back with more frequent podcasts starting next week with the start of spring practice. We'll probably do one Monday or Tuesday of next week. And I think this should carry you. The football's back, folks. It's back.
We'll get a little football here in March and April with your as a side dish to the NCAA basketball tournaments. Thanks for.
I hope I get to watch a little bit of the tournament this year. I hope I do.
You will, Bill. You will.
We'll see. I'll try to.
Do you want to make your announcement about your written material that?
Oh, I thought you were talking about the family thing, the addition of the family.
Who cares about family?
My son will be really insulted that our Ohio State fans not excited about his.
We'll see if my family listens this far into the podcast as well. But I was thinking of a certain thing that's occupying all your.
It's a different kind of birth. It is a different kind of birth. Yes, we have to do these staff profiles in the Dispatch, and it was my turn to do it. And so yes, I did disclose that I am writing a book about the 2024 season, like I did with 2012 and 2014 seasons. And so I'm doing what I can for that. So that is, if you're looking for early holiday shopping, or at least an idea for early holiday shopping, it'll be out probably in October, sometime in October, November at the latest. So there. Thanks, Joey.
You're welcome, Bill. Does it have a title?
It does not have a title. I have a title on mine, but I have not run it through the publisher yet. So until I do that, I should not divulge anything. And it could change.
2024 Ohio State, that's the working title at the moment.
Yeah.
Thanks for. I'm sure it'll be a must read for Ohio State fans. We're talking to a lot of people about what happened in the last few months.
You're talking to what? What'd you say?
You talked to a lot of people about.
I've talked to. I think I'm at about 31 people so far.
Yeah, so it's going to have
any Ohio State players I've not talked to from last year's team that are listening to this podcast. I'm sure they are. Please get in touch with me. I've reached out to you. Please get in touch with me.
It'll be some fresh reporting on the team.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll be back in your podcast feeds next week.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.